Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be taking a look at round 2 of the 2025 Women's World Chess Championship. In round 2, the result is quite unexpected because the game had been going on towards somehow like an inevitable draw, and then suddenly one player made just a terrible mistake and blundered the whole game away. Now, right now, I'm not going to tell you guys who made that blunder. Maybe you already know, but some of you guys don't. So still, that is a big surprise. And actually, in the first match between these two players in 2018, Tan Zhongyi and Zhu Wenjun, these two players, they have been playing against each other in the Women's World Chess Championship as well. But at that time, Zhu Wenjun was the challenger, whereas right now she is the world champion, and Tan Zhongyi in 2018, she was the world champion. And then this year, Tan Zhongyi is the challenger. In round 2, she played the move c4. She decided to go for the English opening, which it is something that she exactly did the same before in 2018, 7 years ago. She played this exact same opening with c4 on the very first move. But actually in round 2 of that game, she lost to Zhu Wenjun. And she decided to play for this exact same opening once again 7 years later in the exact same round with the exact same pieces, like color of pieces. She is with the white pieces once again. And she didn't really think about whether it is bad luck or something. She just decided to repeat it again and go for revenge. So the game is actually really thrilling, full of before that huge mistake, everything was just really calm, but then things started to go really wrong for one of the sides. And so today, right now, let's jump into this game where all the buzz is about. So we have Tan Zhongyi with the white pieces and Zhu Wenjun with the black pieces, and we have the move c4. The English opening, I think everyone is pretty much familiar with it, and here we have the move knight f6, knight c3, and e5. So basically this is like the turnaround Sicilian where white goes like e4, c5, knight f3, and then knight c6. This looks very similar, just besides the fact that white is playing much more like black does in the Sicilian. And here we have knight f3, knight c6, and g3. So white is aiming to fianchetto her bishop this way, which is really common in the English. And here we have d5. After c takes d5, of course, because if you just ignore the pawns, then you will allow black to successfully push the pawns down the board, and black will have a huge space advantage in the center. So of course you would like to reply and take on d5 at this point. After knight takes d5, we have bishop g2 and bishop c5 developing the bishop. Both sides decide to go for a castle, and here we have the move d3. So now since the bishop has fianchettoed, you no longer have to worry about if this bishop is still on f1 and then you play d3, it will block your own bishop. You don't have to worry about that anymore. And right now d3 opens up this diagonal for the dark square bishop to develop. And then again we have the move h6, which is really necessary at this point, because if you just play something else like, I don't know, like for example, rook e8, then you might first of all allow something like bishop g5 to attack the queen, which might be annoying. So in the game, h6 was played, gaining control of the g5 square, preventing bishop g5 and even knight g5 at some point for white's knight to maneuver back to e4. And in the game here, we have knight takes d5. This is all really standard. Queen takes d5, bishop d2, developing the bishop. So now that the g5 square is no longer able for the bishop to go to, white is now aiming to get this bishop to c3 to put some pressure on this diagonal, especially on the e5 pawn. And right now, as you can see by looking at the time usage, both sides didn't really use any of their time. This means that this is still in their comfort zone, in their home preparation. And in the game here, already Wenjun is starting to use her time with this queen d6 move. She actually spent 11 minutes on this move before deciding to go queen d6. And of course, here for black has many options, a ton of options. To go a5, for example, to gain control of the b4 square, as well as to push the pawns on the queen side to create more space. a5 is a move that is possible. And here also black can go rook d8, for example, to put some pressure on this d file, threatening e4 at some point. Queen d6 is considered as the third best option here, and in the game, Wenjun decides to go for it. And here, Tan Zhongyi spent 1 minute before deciding to go bishop c3, but of course, this is a move that doesn't need much of thinking because this is just your bishop d2's follow-up plan to develop your bishop, and so Tan Zhongyi played this pretty fast. And in the game, we have the move queen e7. Wenjun actually spent another 11 minutes on this move. And as you can see, sometimes it's not worth it for you to spend so much time on one move or a couple of moves in a row, especially because you need more time to calculate in the middle game and in the end game where it's actually going to be more complex and needs more calculation. Whereas right now, maybe the only reason that Wenjun is spending so much time thinking might be that she is not familiar with this variation anymore, or like she just wants to choose between a lot of options here. She can also go for bishop d4, which is really a really good move as well to offer a bishop trade. This is also possible. Queen e7 is not bad as well, but it's kind of a question for us, like why is Wenjun thinking so long? But after 11-minute think, she still decides to go for queen e7, which is not a mistake, a pretty nice move. And in the game, Tan Zhongyi spent 3 minutes on knight d2. Her idea is to first of all open up this diagonal for the bishop, and also trying to maneuver this knight to a better square. This knight can jump to c4, to e4, or even to b3. It is a very flexible knight. And right now, Wenjun decides to go for knight d4, another 10-minute thing. She spent about like half an hour, more than half an hour on these three moves. You see like here queen d6, and here queen e7, then here knight d4. She spent a lot of time on these three moves, which I think is just quite unnecessary. Knight d4 again is, well, at this point, not the best move, but it's fine. But it's actually better for black to go for something like a5, which is always possible here. But again, all of these three moves, queen d6, queen e7, and a5 here, black is having a lot of options in each and every position. So probably that is why, like, Wenjun is spending so much time deciding what to do, and then she decided to go for something. And in the game, she decides to go for knight d4, and here we have e3. The knight goes to b5, which is her idea, and here we have a4. So even though Tan Zhongyi right now is giving up her bishop pair, but she does have this really nice pawn structure in the center of the board, which she is actually threatening at some point to go for d4. So even though black has the bishop pair, but white is doing really nice here with all of the development, and also this bishop is putting a ton of pressure on this b7 pawn. So actually white is doing really well here. And in the game, Wenjun decides to go for c6 to blockade this diagonal and then finally freeing her bishop to develop, but also she can probably go for something like rook b8 to use the rook to defend the pawn, because defending this pawn, but at the same time she also ran away from this diagonal of the bishop, whereas right now if you go for something like c6, still in the future there's like a5, a6 ideas, and then this bishop can take on c6 sometimes to attack this rook. But of course it's a plan far, far away, and right now it's not a big deal for black. And in the game we have a5. So Tan Zhongyi is going for this idea immediately, but of course black is in time to defend with bishop d7 as played in the game. And here it's no longer good enough for white to go a6, because simply black can just ignore a6 and play something like b6 or b5. Both are fine moves, and right now the bishop is defending the c6 pawn, which made it impossible for white to take on this c6 pawn. So that is why in the game, Zhongyi decides to start maneuvering her pieces and spent some time here thinking and played queen b3. Now, queen b3 is a move that is fine here, but it's actually better for her to maneuver her knight first, to go knight c4 or even knight b3 here. At least her idea will be to go d4. Like, let's say after knight c4, first of all, you jump this knight out of the way, and now you're threatening d4 on the very next move. And here, let's say, because you're going d4 and the bishop is somehow misplaced. But actually, if you want to, you can even go d4 immediately, and it's not good for black to take, because after c takes d4, bishop goes back. Again, there's something like knight c4 to attack the bishop. White will gain a ton of tempo, and it's really nice for white. So in the game, however, Zhongyi decides to go for the queenside pawns in black's territory, and she played queen b3, attacking the b7 weakness, which is also probably reasonable, but not the best. And in the game, we have rook b8. And this just shows why rook b8 at this position is better than c6, because after rook b8, you can also defend the b7 pawn, which is more flexible than c6 itself. In the game c6, and here we have queen b3, rook 8 b8 to defend the pawn. And right now, Zhongyi decides to jump this knight into the position with knight e4 to attack the bishop, but most likely she is not gonna take the bishop right now. Because, let's say, this knight is doing really well here, and if black doesn't really do anything, then probably most likely white is just gonna put this knight here for a while and then maybe at some point take this bishop. Also worth noting is that it is okay for white to use this knight to exchange the dark square bishop of black's, because after that, let's say, well, actually, exactly what happened in the game, takes. And we reach a position like this where both sides have a light square bishop. So it's the same colored bishop, more like an endgame right now. And we see that this bishop is on a brilliant diagonal, putting pressure on these pawns. And for black's bishop is not enjoying anything. It is blocked inside its own pawn chains. Bishop e6 doesn't really do anything. And if you want to trade the bishops, even here, white can go e4, f4 to start launching an attack. And white will be doing slightly better here. So in the game, Zhongyi decides to go for d4, and here we have b6. We have a couple of exchanges, and here rook a7. Bishop e6, attacking the queen. This is all very reasonable moves. The position is more closely to an equal position. And it just seems like both sides are heading for an inevitable inevitable draw, that is. D takes e4, e5, queen takes e5, queen d4, and now white is offering a queen trade. More like threatening a queen trade, because if black ignores it, then black will lose the b6 pawn. So here, Wenjun decides to take the pawn, and after e takes d4, bishop takes g2, we have the bishops off the board now. This is simply a drawish position. So drawn. But of course, white is the side who is slightly more active than black is. White has this really active rook on a file, and also gaining control of the 7th rank, as well as white is attacking black's pawn. But of course, after black played b5, black no longer has any weaknesses. That is really weak, and it's not that easy for white to attack the pawns. And here, but of course, the position is not over yet, and both sides decide to go on to play on, because they haven't even reached the second time control yet. And of course, it is possible for them to offer a draw, but it just definitely shows that both sides want to play on and no one offered a draw. In the game, we have rook a8 offering a rook trade, rook e7, because if you take on a8 first, and after rook a8, it will probably, it's still a draw, but after rook a3 or something, rook c5, and then rook a6, this position, it is still a draw, definitely. But, rook e7 was played in the game, and it is still fine. So the position right now is completely equalized. We have a pair of rooks off the board. Probably white's rook is slightly more active than black's rook, but this is a dead draw. c5, so now another couple of trades are happening on the board, and here we have king f8. But the only chance for white is that white has the king much faster to go up the board, and the rook, very importantly, cuts up the 7th rank of black, and it's impossible for black's king to get up right now. And the b5 pawn is also too far away from this king, and it's not still a little bit tricky. And most importantly here, Zhu Wenjun only has 7 minutes left on the clock, and there's still a couple of moves away from reaching the second time control. Whereas for Tan Zhongyi, she has a huge time advantage. She still has 40 minutes left on the clock. So of course, there's no reason that she should offer a draw here, and she decides to play on, which is very reasonable. First of all, she played rook b7 to tickle the b5 pawn, and here we have rook c3. King goes up, and here rook c2, deciding to tickle the pawns. King e3 goes back, and here we have check. But Tan Zhongyi, if she wanted to draw, she can definitely go for king e4 and then allow threefold repetition. But instead, she decides to go for king d2 to attack the rook. Now the rook decides to go to f3 to attack the f2 pawn here. The king goes here, and here rook f5 to defend the b5 pawn. But actually, it's okay for black to go for something like rook b3. It is better to defend your own passed pawn this way in front of it, instead of just like beside it, because it will be really hard for you to push the pawn further. And also importantly, this rook is cutting off the king's file, making it really hard for the king to go up. And if the king really wants to go up, then white needs to go towards this side, but then black can go rook f3 again to tickle the pawns, and it will be a very easy draw. But in the game, Zhu Wenjun decides to go for rook f5, which is a small inaccuracy, allowing white's king to go up, and suddenly things are going a little bit wrong for black already. In the game, Zhu Wenjun decides to go for h5 to push her pawns on the king side, which is the right method, and here f4 was played. Now, with only 2 minutes left on the clock for Zhu Wenjun, it is really hard for her to play actually at this point already. She played a few inaccuracies, especially rook f5. I think rook f5, even though it's not losing after that move, but I think in the whole game, rook f5 is the start of the whole wrong direction, and I think it counts as the losing move here. Because after rook f5, it leads to variations where black only has one move to make a draw, and it's not even easy. Sometimes you even have to sacrifice your pawns, and the rook is really passive on f5 actually. You see, it's just really easy for black to make a draw after rook b3 because it cuts off this king to go up, and it's a draw. But rook f5 was played, and sometimes it's just really tricky, and you make these kind of inaccurate moves when you're under time pressure, and things started to go wrong suddenly, and this can also bring you a lot of emotional effects. h5, f4, and here, a terrible mistake, a terrible blunder by Zhu Wenjun. She actually only has one move that makes a draw, and the move is b4, to give up the pawn. And you see how desperate black's situation is. Like, the situation is so desperate that right now black needs to sacrifice a pawn in order to activate this rook. And after rook takes b4, at least the rook is now able to free and try to create more counterplay towards like white's kingside pawns, and this is still going to be a draw. But this is such a desperate option for black, and it's not that easy to see. It doesn't come to your mind at first when it comes to sacrificing pawns for no reason. And here at this point, Zhu Wenjun made a big blunder, and she played king e8, simply allowing white to go up with the king. And now you see this rook is kind of dead on f5. Still, it can be defended by g6, but if this pawn wasn't on b5, then this rook can swing to a5 to activate and tickle the pawns on h2 and everything, and pushing h4. That will be a draw actually. But here in the game, it's no longer the same. The rook is under big trouble here, and g6 doesn't really work here because white can now play something like rook b6, and after the king goes up, play d5. Why not go d5 immediately? Well, because if you go d5 immediately right now, this rook will at least be able to go back. And it's better for white to first of all trap this rook on f5 completely, and then just start pushing the pawns towards victory. So here in the game, Zhu Wenjun decides to drop this rook back immediately to f6, but simply now losing the b5 pawn this way is not worth it because black has already allowed white's king to go up further up the board, and black is a move late. If the rook were on a6 right now, then rook a2 will be coming to attack the pawns, and probably that will still be a draw. But right now, the king is already on e4, and also white is attacking the h5 pawn. Things are suddenly falling apart. g6 was played to defend the pawn, but after d5, and also, very importantly, let's drop back a few moves. After f4, this is move 40. And after this 40th move by black, king e8, black needs to make another move in order to gain an extra 30 minutes. And still, Zhu Wenjun has 2 minutes left on the clock. And sometimes you just desperately want to gain another 30 minutes, and you just decide to go for a move that seems really calm, and sometimes your mind just comes really a lot of complex, confusing thoughts just comes to your mind, and you just make mistakes, blunders. And sometimes it happens. It happens a lot, especially when it's time to reach the second time control and players make mistakes. And here it just happened. This kind of situation happened once again. And after rook b5, g6, already both sides gain another extra 30 minutes, but I think it is already not enough for black to save the position anymore, because at this point, Zhongyi still has an hour to think, to find her way to win the position. She played d5, and actually for the rest of the game, she made no mistakes, even though she allowed black to take the h2 pawn, but now she successfully gets the king towards into the position, tickling black's pawns, and after f5 here, h4, she took on it, and after g takes h4, she played rook h7, and after h3, she spent actually 22 minutes on this king d6 move. It is the only winning move here, but actually it is the most obvious move actually. But when it comes to these kinds of winning positions, you do want to think again and again to make sure that it is winning. And of course, at this point, she has her time. She still has 15 minutes to think, so it's her choice. And she spent a long time thinking and played this winning move. And the rest, she made no mistake. She blitzed out every move and pushed the pawn towards the 7th rank. Zhu Wenjun is just unable to prevent the pawn from queening. Her rook is being kind of held by her own pawn, because if the rook moves away, she'll lose the h2 pawn, and the rook is too inactive, passive beneath its own pawn. And here after rook h3, king b7, rook b3 check, the king gets chased away, and after rook b2, king a6, rook e2, and right now this rook is on the 2nd rank, still limiting black's rook from moving, because you move, you lose the pawn. And right now, white is threatening to go king e8 to promote her pawn, and it's unstoppable. King e7, and here Zhu Wenjun resigned because d8 queenie is unstoppable. And if you play something well, actually you can't do anything. It's just game over. d8 queenie is unstoppable. And now after rook d1, but it's actually important here to first of all take the h2 pawn, because then you won't give black any more chances. But of course, if you promote first, it is also fine. Everything is winning at this point, and Zhongyi won the 2nd game, round 2 of the 2025 Women's World Chess Championship. This pattern happened exactly in their first match in 2018, where Zhongyi was the champion at that time, and she lost her 2nd game, and she lost the title. And in this year, 7 years later, she is the challenger, and she won the 2nd game. So is this something related to luck? I mean, it's the same pattern so far, and the same opening as well. So, but of course, everything will be unexpected. The results may be more unexpected, and today, round 3 will be playing, and in the next video, I'm gonna do a recap of round 3, and hope you guys will enjoy it. But right now, hope you guys enjoyed this video as well as this game. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!